There's so much more to becoming a successful Chief People Officer than experience alone. It's about building the mindset, the skills, and a plan that help you succeed and make an impact. Those three components, mindset, skills, and planning, are three of the things that leapt out at me when I was listening back to the interview you're about to hear, and I was trying to decide what title to give the episode and what to tell you about it in this introduction. The interview is part of a special HR Coffee Time series where I speak with Chief People Officers and CHROs, asking them all the same 9 questions that were chosen by you, the HR Coffee Time listeners, to help demystify what this top-level HR role involves, how to reach it, and how to succeed in it. If you're new here, hello, and if you're a long-time listener to the podcast, welcome back. It's so wonderful to have you listening today or watching if you're watching on YouTube. I'm Fay Wallis, a career and leadership coach for HR and people professionals, and I'm also the creator of the Essential HR Planner and the Inspiring HR Leadership Programme, as well as being the host of this podcast. My guest today is Dr Andrew Stephenson, who I only realised after the interview, when I looked back at some of the messages he'd sent me, that I think he prefers to be called Andy instead of Andrew. So Andy, if you're listening to this or watching it, I'm so sorry for calling you the long version of your name throughout the whole interview. You were incredibly polite not to pick me up on it. To everyone else listening or watching right now, I'll share a little bit more about Andy. So he has been a Chief People Officer in 3 major international businesses, each time leading a cultural transformation that's helped those organisations become recognised amongst the most engaging places to work in the world. At his current company, Equiniti, he joined after they'd had 5 CPOs in 5 years. But under his leadership, they've since become a top employer in the UK, the US and India. And the HR team has picked up a host of awards, including 3 CIPD awards and Best L&D Strategy at the HR Excellence Awards. Andy has also been named one of the CIPD's HR 30. Beyond his day job, he's a non-executive director, a fellow of both the CIPD and the CMI, and a keen advocate for the pottery industry in his hometown of Stoke-on-Trent. Before we dive into the main part of the show, though, I'd just like to take a quick moment to say a big and heartfelt thank you to Kate Lawson and Neville Taylor, who both shared lovely posts about HR Coffee Time on LinkedIn recently, saying how much they're enjoying the podcast and recommending it to everyone in their network. Kate and Neville, I can't tell you how much it means to know that you're enjoying the show and that you're helping spread the word about it to more people. Thank you so much for your support. I hugely, hugely appreciate it. And now let's go ahead and meet Andy. I hope you're going to enjoy learning from him as much as I did. So the very first question that I would love to dive in with is, how did you get your first Chief People Officer role?
So there's a really old proverb around some people watching things happen, some people making it happen, and some people wondering what happened. And to be honest, that phrase comes to mind because it was the chairman of the company where I got my first Chief People Officer job who just said, Andy, that's what you did. Because I was in a business that didn't have that role. It had a number of people operating at a head of position. And I just went to the chairman one day and said, there's a much better way of doing this. And I'd actually drafted out a people strategy as to where I thought it could take the organisation for the next 5 years. So I took him through the process, took him through how it could work, what the role could look like. And then I said, and by the way, I'm the best person for that job. It was a bit of a punt, to say the least. But effectively, I managed to persuade a business to give me a shot at it. So, and I will be eternally grateful to both the chairman and the chief exec who listened to this 30-year-old making a pitch to them and decided to give me a go. Yeah, that's how I got my first CPO job.
Oh, wow, that is fantastic to hear. And actually, now that we are quite a few interviews into this series, it's been really fascinating to see how often this seems to happen. Like quite a few of the guests so far have thought no, there needs to be a CPO role here, and have gone about actually convincing everyone that it should happen and they should be the person in the role. So I think it's really reassuring for anyone listening who is in an organization where there might not be that chief people officer position yet, to think, oh, all these other people have gone ahead and done it. I'm going to give it a go too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can also imagine anyone listening is thinking, tell us more, Andrew. Like, what did you say when you were pitching to the chairman and the chief exec? How did you convince them that, yes, this is an essential role?
I talked to them about fundamentally a couple of things, and HR and training and all the different compartments they had were just focused on running a function. And to me, HR, people functions, wherever you want to go with the name of it, I often talk about they really should own the kind of unwritten constitution of a business. So it's very easy to manage policies and procedures and things that are written down. But fundamentally, if you're going to drive success, you need to alter the culture of the business. The business I was in, as part of its business strategy, needed to move from being sales focused to customer focused. And the two aren't in conflict with each other, but they're very different as to which you pitch first. And my kind of conversation with the chairman and the chief executive was, unless there is a department, a function, a role that is running this change thread through the organization, and particularly the lenses I concentrated on were leadership and employee engagement. So unless there is a position that is driving those forward, then really you won't get this change through the business, and therefore you won't deliver the business success. Or if you do deliver it, it won't be in the optimized way that it could if you could align the whole business behind it. So it was really a case of taking the business strategy, looking at what the people strategy was, but then elevating it from what does that functionally mean for a HR department, and starting to think about what does that mean for the change and transformation that you need throughout the business, both in the tangible things that are written down, but also how you change the behaviors and what people do when nobody's checking, frankly. And that was kind of the pitch.
Well, it sounds like an excellent pitch and so helpful to hear it. I have a feeling I might keep saying, oh, that was so helpful today during our interview. This could end up being a theme, because there's a lot of talk about HR needs to be more strategic. You've got to make sure that you're integrating the people strategy with the overall business strategy.
Yeah.
But I know, unless you've been in a position of doing that, or working in an organization where there is someone in the team who's doing that really well, it can be hard to picture what that actually means and looks like. So it's so useful for so many people listening to hear that real example of not only how you did the pitch, but what that really looks like and what that means from a strategic perspective. So thank you for sharing that.
No, that's all right. And yeah, I think the document I presented, it was a bit classic in what you're saying, that it was concise. It was on one page. The font was quite small, to be honest. But fundamentally around those themes of leadership and engagement, what I pitched was effectively what would be different, how we would measure it, and what were the activities that we'd do first to get going. So it was a really simple document, but was talking about this will help you deliver the strategy to its optimal. That was fundamentally what I was trying to achieve.
Again, I think that will be so not just useful, but reassuring for people, because I'm in a very privileged position to have seen quite a few people strategies now. And although I suppose that's not just about strategy, is it? That's more about your pitch as to also being a CPO. But I think people often think they need to be pages and pages long. And of course they can be, but again, it's nice to think it can be really powerful just to be able to put things on one page. And actually, there's a lot to be said for doing that sometimes, because it really means you've got to have clarity of thought to be able to get everything onto one page, doesn't it?
You absolutely have. And one of the things I spend an awful lot of my time doing is trying to stop occupational hobbies in businesses. That there are many things that fall into the kind of neat little box of somebody wants to do it and they like doing it, so it gets done, even though there's no crossover with the business actually needing it. And forcing you to get your entire strategy on one page really means you've got to put a red line through those things. There's just no space for them, no time for them, and you've got to focus on the things that the business need. Now, if you can put all three together and have a team that can do things, want to do things, and it's what the business needs, that's when you get really effective. But that exercise of getting it onto a single page, easy to remember, easy to communicate, I think that's hugely powerful.
That is such a great term that I've never heard before, occupational hobbies.
Absolutely. I'll put a shout out to a guy called Dave Moore at a company called Dove Nest Group, who I've done many programs with over the years, probably going back 20 plus years when I first worked with them as somebody going through one of their programs, and then I've actually used them for transformation programs. But yeah, that's one of Dave's classics that has really stuck with me over many years.
It's absolutely great because that is one of the things that takes the strategy from being a nice wish list of things to have and things to get done and things that you don't necessarily get through because there are so many of them, to one that can actually have an impact and you get the work done because everyone's not being distracted doing all of these projects and things that they would really love to do and probably are helpful for the business, but it's not lasered in on the main thing.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting carried away and we're talking about strategy. You can see that I'm thinking about strategy non-stop at the moment because I'm running a workshop on it soon. So I will move us along because I'm sure lots of people listening are thinking, come on, Fay, what about the next question? You've only done one from the main 9 that you're supposed to cover so far. So the very next question is, now, this is actually linked with what your job title was before you became a CPO. So I think you just mentioned you were a head of before. I wasn't sure if you were a head of or a people director, because the question is, what has been the biggest difference between either being a head of, if that was your last role, or HR director or people director, if that was your last role, and then being a chief people officer? So what's the biggest difference between those two roles?
I mean, I think you could probably fill many episodes of this podcast with just that debate on all sorts of levels. But for myself, at the simplest level, is a head of or a people director, whichever you want to call them, is fundamentally about optimizing the function and what it delivers for the business. Whereas I think a CPO, a CHRO, whatever you want to call it, you are more working on the business and using the people lever across the breadth of all the other functions that you have, and you just happen to deliver optimized people processes for it, usually through a good team. But it's much more, I am a business leader more than I'm a functional leader. And I think that applies across the entire C-suite. Again, one of the things I think about is, which team are you in? And I find at all levels of management and leadership, very often people think the team they are in is the one they lead, the people that report to them. And you get truly effective when people start to think that the team they are in is their peer group, and that actually they are managing and leading the team below to deliver in that. But if everyone starts to think of their peers as their team, and that they're then optimizing success below them, then you tend to have a much more powerful organization. So I think fundamentally it's working at a business level as opposed to delivering at a functional level. That's how I see the difference between the two roles. And they're both actually completely critical to the business being successful. Those people in those head of and director roles have got to deliver a tremendous job, and they've got to be leading their function brilliantly. But I think when you step up, you've just got to have much more breadth.
And for someone listening or watching right now, I keep forgetting to mention the watching part now that the episodes are all available on YouTube as well. But for someone watching right now who is thinking, okay, that's brilliant, I've got it. So this is the key difference. It's really about being the business leader rather than the functional leader. That's terrifying. How am I supposed to take that step up? And how can I get myself to that point? That feels so different to what I'm doing now. What would your advice to them be?
Well, firstly, I think that's completely natural thing to think of. It's a completely natural thing to do. Slightly different topic, but similar principle. Again, another quote I love is Mark Twain's when people are public speaking, that there's two types of speakers, those who get nervous and those that are liars. I think if you step into that sort of first role for the first time and you don't have a degree of thinking, how am I going to do this? Then frankly, there's something quite wrong. And it's about getting out there and giving the business a good listening to and understanding what those functions do and how they link together, It's about creating that real team dynamic at the C-suite so that you are up to something together. Not that you all happen to have a set of objectives that vaguely point in the same way. And it's about really getting to understand what those team members are doing. It's frankly the same skills that you use all the way through building a career. And anyone who's in a head of position or a director position will have demonstrated those skills over and over. But instead of pointing them down the function, you just need to have them much more outward looking across the organization. And then the other thing is I'm a huge passionate advocate of lifelong learning. So just get out there and learn stuff and do courses and immerse yourselves in other bits of the business and take opportunities. I've been fortunate enough in my career to bolt on lots of other things. So at various points, I've run procurement, property, IT, audit, fleet management, various other things. It's just take the opportunity to learn bits, take them on, and see what you can learn and move forward.
There are so many questions I could ask you from what you just shared, Andrew. I feel like, oh my gosh, we need a whole second episode. I'm trying to be really good at reining myself in from all these extra questions, because otherwise these episodes are just getting longer and longer. So I'm going to be super disciplined. And am I going to ask you a question, another spin-off one, or shall I move on? Okay, I'm just going to ask you one spin-off question.
Okay.
And that is what you just said about looking after other projects or other functions. So have you done that as a bolt-on to your HR role, or have you actually stepped aside and moved out of HR temporarily to do those things?
The answer, as with many of these things, is a bit of both. So I've always retained the CHRO, the CPO brief, as it were. But when you take over a new function that, let's be clear, often you're taking it over because it needs some work and it needs some assistance. So it does two things. It gives you a chance to move over to get to know that team to do it, but it's a great opportunity to bring somebody from the tier below or several people from the tier below up. So I've used those opportunities for me to go and get closer to the other function to help do whatever needs to be done to make that team maximize its success and to optimize it, but used it as an opportunity to really elevate one or several of the people that sit in my kind of HR line, as it were, and expose them to committee meetings, board meetings, things that they may not get to do. So I've been there, but given them much more of the brief. And, very fortunate that a number of those sort of people are now in other businesses and doing much bigger roles and probably doing quite a bit of it better than I do. But there you go. That's I think that's part and parcel of trying to be a good leader, to get people into those spaces.
Yeah, and so rewarding when you see them thriving and doing that.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I will stop with the spin-off questions for a moment and move on to one that I had actually told you I was going to ask,
Okay.
which is, when you started your first CPO role, how was it different to what you had expected?
I think the biggest bit is I sat there, and it was an organisation that in some ways was very progressive, but in many ways was also quite old-fashioned. It had been founded in the 60s by an owner-founder. So I got promoted and immediately got the big office with the big desk and the massive door, and you sit there and you shut the door and you look at a combination of all the things I'd promised that I was going to deliver and all the things that just needed doing anyway. And then sat there and realized that there's absolutely nobody going to give you any help as to what order to do any of it in. And so that's probably that was what was different than what I expected. I sort of thought you'd have all the things to do and they'd be in a really neat and sensible order that you could just start to work your way through. And of course, none of that is the case. And everything's intertwined, everything's interconnected, particularly when you're looking at things like culture change. There's a real danger that you get rid of things that you don't want to get rid of completely inadvertently. And so it was just a sense of, okay, prioritization has just taken on an entirely new level. And I think it's also the realization, and I've realized this at different points in my career in different contexts, that there is absolutely zero chance of delivering any of it if you can't get your team bought into it. That's the other thing. So I think they were the biggest things when I got my first ever CPO role, to go, how on earth do you prioritize this? And how am I going to get everyone bought into this idea that I've just pitched somebody we can do?
This answer actually feels like it leads on perfectly to my next question, Andrew, which is which skills, habits, or practices have most helped you succeed as a CPO? Because having just talked about some of the challenges and some of the differences to what you'd expected, I'd love to hear how you then made it all a success. And to make it a success, that will have been based partly or in a good part because of skills, habits, or practices. So I'm intrigued to hear.
Yeah, I think that the ones I'd go is firstly, you should always try and remember that you are there to support the team to do a good job. That's fundamentally what you need to do. So my diary is always filled up first with what the team need. So I'm pretty flexible on giving people the choices of how many one-to-ones they'll get, how often they'll get. They'll generally be very coaching style. Some people prefer weekly, quite short interventions. Some people prefer kind of monthly, much longer conversations. Some people want you to go out and be in their world. Some people just want a coaching chat. So my first thing I fill my diary up with is, how do people want my help to support them? To manage them's the wrong word. Yes, you sign off their kind of holidays and things like that. But when you've got people at that level, it really is, how do you support them to do an amazing job? So that's kind of priority one. And I think priority two is making sure that the time for you to work on the strategy, on the business, is defended at all costs. So I have always had blocks of time in the diary. Actually, these days, the modern tools in things like Microsoft Suites and Google Suites will actually put focus time in, I think they call it. I've done that practice for many years. And the rule has always been that can be moved around because clearly things happen in the business, but it doesn't ever get deleted. So there is always a decent block of time to just sit back and go, where is the business at? What are we focusing on? What do we need to do? And I then think there's the habit of getting out into the business and always remembering that the people on the front line know 10 times more about what's going on than you ever can. Whatever clever kind of listening tools you've got, and we've got some amazing technology products that help us understand the business, but you need to make sure you're listening to the people at the front who are actually doing the work and delivering what they need. So I think it's focus on the team, focus on giving yourself the space to think, and make sure the people right across the business are engaged and you're listening to them. That's probably the habits that have managed to get me to a place I can do okay at this role for such a long time.
Well, it sounds like you're doing definitely more than just okay at it, Andrew. And again, reassuring and helpful to hear those practical examples of how you are using your time. But I know how busy the role can be.
Yeah.
Do you find that it spills over into long hours, or have you got ways of protecting your time so that you're not working really long hours all the time?
I think work-life balance is an interesting bit. I think many people take a view that work-life balance is, how do you keep the two segregated? I think it is more about balance from a personal point of view. So, I enjoy fitness. I enjoy running. I think that's important for your mental health as well as your physical health. If I want to go for a run in the middle of the day, I'll do that. But it will be so transparent. We actually have a corporate Strava account so everyone can see it. Equally, if the flip of that means that I'll get up on a Saturday morning because it's a good time to reflect and work through some emails, I'll do that. So for me, it's about keeping your life in balance across the different bits rather than kind of segregating it too much. And the other bit is you make the job what you enjoy. At the end of the day, transforming a business, that's not a chore. It's a real opportunity. And I'm fortunate enough to be in a business where we are genuinely challenging to be the best in the world at what we do. We're not there yet. We're not perfect, but we're absolutely challenging and getting that way. And we see a realistic plan to get there. And so, yeah, that's exciting and it's interesting and it keeps you focused.
Well, talking about challenges, then, I'd love to ask you the next question, which is what is the biggest challenge you've experienced as a Chief People Officer?
So I've been in lots of different businesses and they've been at various different points of their life cycle. I'm absolutely crystal clear in my mind that the first duty of any employer is to employ. And in order to do that, you've got to be sustainable, you've got to be profitable, you've got to be in a place that the business actually works. And sometimes that means you've got to part company with people. That could be individuals, it could be teams, it could be whole business units. If you're in a crisis that is in some way existential, then it could be hundreds of people. And I think, anybody who doesn't have a challenge internally and morally with needing to frankly put people out of work, then there's something wrong with that kind of view of the world. What you need to do is do it eloquently, professionally, realize that people are people, and you've got to do it right. But that is a challenge. And I've, over my career, been fortunate enough to be in businesses that have generally been growing and employed much more people than going the other way. But on occasions, I've had to lead projects that have put hundreds of people out of work. And I know they were the right things for the organization to enable it to survive, to grow, and to be in a place where it could employ people for years to come. But that doesn't make it good, doesn't make it fun, and it's not a bit of this job that anybody should ever enjoy. And I think every time that scenario comes around, it's challenging.
Yeah. And you're making me think about the fact that even though that can be one of the most challenging aspects of the role, or one of the most challenging things that many CPOs will face, it is possible to do it well, where people actually feel supported throughout the process and will still be speaking positively about the organisation and hopefully about you as well once it's all happened. Early on in my business journey, when I was first working for myself and I was predominantly focused on career coaching, I did a lot of outplacement support. And I went into one organisation where they were closing down the entire site. And I was a little bit nervous when I first went to the site because I didn't know how everyone would be feeling. And I was absolutely shocked to see how incredibly positively everybody spoke about the HR team. They didn't actually have a CPO, they had a people director. But it was amazing. It was really heartening to see that something could be done to, so many people could go through such a difficult time but feel truly supported and actually still be speaking very positively about the organization. So I just thought I would mention that because this is something that's come up before as well in these interviews, that is such a hard part of the job.
It is, and it never gets easier, and it doesn't make any difference whether it's one person, 10 people, or 100 people. I go back to, the duty of an employer is to employ, and you want to employ people, but sometimes for the long-term success of the business or for a multitude of reasons, a person isn't in the right organization or a function is not right for the organization, and you've got to move on for that. But as I say, that never gets easier, however long you do this, or however far away you get from being the person who actually has to deliver the news. That is challenging. It's people's livelihoods. It's people's sense of identity in some cases. And you've got to do that, as I say, eloquently and professionally.
And it can take a huge emotional toll as well. You've already touched on some of the things that you do to maintain your mental and physical well-being. I'm loving this idea that the whole company, there's this joint Strava account that everyone can see what everyone's doing on there. So you probably have gone quite a long way in answering this question already, but just in case there was anything else you wanted to add, the next question that I have for you is, how do you maintain your mental well-being in such a high priority and demanding role? I suppose especially when there are situations like the one we've just been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as with most people in these sort of positions, I've got plenty of things wrong in my career, and certainly mental health is one of those. So before I was a CPO, I still had pretty big head of jobs and so on. And I did go through what I think today would be labelled as burnout. It was probably labelled more of a nervous breakdown at the time, and ended up off work, medication, counselling, all of those kind of things. And so you realise, going back to what I said earlier, that work-life balance is really important, actually. And it's incredibly important that you take the time for physical and for mental well-being. Very often the two are intertwined. As I say, for me, it's fitness generally helps, whether that's running, spin classes, or whatever it is. Sadly, a litany of injuries tells me I'm now too old for football, but it was that for a very long time. And I think, it's about just keeping yourself fit and keeping yourself focused, and being very, very happy to walk away from meetings and walk away from screens when you need the break. We do lots of things as a business. We've got mental health first aiders. We provide apps where you can get meditation. We give things like headspace to all of our employees. We provide vitality to everybody in the organization that incentivizes them to keep physically fit. But little things as well that pretty much everyone can do. So we changed all the defaults in our meeting bookings. So if you book a meeting in our business, it's 25 minutes or 50, not 30 minutes or an hour. And that forces a break into everybody's calendar several times a day. And little bits like that just stop you going back to back to back to back through a day can have a huge impact for not really a lot of effort. So we're very focused on those sort of things. And I am personally, because it's really important. You can't deliver at your best if you frankly burnt yourself out mentally or physically.
Well, thank you for being so transparent about your experience of burnout. And I'm so pleased that you've bounced back from it and that you've been hopefully okay since then. I think it's incredibly powerful when people speak about these things openly. And I know that you sharing that will help many people who will go on to listen to this interview, because it's so easy to feel trapped and like you're really alone when you're the one who is going through that. And it's also easy to think that people in the most senior level positions, so whether they're a CPO or it's called a CHRO, depending on the organization, that they're somehow these perfect beings or these super beings. And I think it's so helpful for people to see the humanity behind the role and the person behind the role properly, not just a professional sheen. So I'm so grateful to you for being so honest with that.
No, it's important. And clearly I wouldn't have gotten us through that period without the support of, firstly, the NHS, who did a tremendous job at that time. Secondly, my family, who supported me. But again, throwing shout out to names, a guy called David Miles, who was my manager in the organization at that time. He's now an independent NLP coach. Actually, how your manager treats you and how they work through that process is incredibly important to people's resilience and people's ability to come back from it. And so a huge part of me moving past that period of my life and going on, fortunately, to pick my career up and continue a career trajectory, is how that individual supported me at that time. And so, he's another one who should get a shout out for doing the right thing in the right way. And a lot of managers could learn from that sort of approach.
Well, I hope that he enjoys hearing the shout out and realizes how much you appreciate his support.
Hopefully so. I'll send him a copy on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Okay, so the questions are going to change slightly now. This next question is, what advice do you have for anyone listening who would like to be a CPO or CHRO one day?
Get to know the business in its widest sense. It's much easier to transition into this role. It's much easier to pitch for this role. It's much easier to get this role if you've got a wider understanding of the organization than just down a functional line. And I think many brilliant HR people do that anyway, but it's just really take that to the nth degree, as it were. I was fortunate that I didn't start in HR. Obviously, it's perfectly acceptable that those that do, but I started in sales roles. I started in operational roles. I did admin roles. I've loaded lorries in warehouses and things like that. So I had a broad business knowledge and had run P&Ls before I got into that world and before I started to move up in HR. But I think you need to have that kind of breadth of knowledge, not necessarily in huge depth, certainly not in the depth of the people who've done those jobs and moved through that career. But I think my advice would be to really get to know the business, not to just get to know it through the lens of HR.
And for anyone listening who is thinking, okay, this makes total sense, I need to get to know the business more, but then at the same time is thinking, oh no, I don't know how though. Like, what do I actually do? What are the practical steps? How can I be approaching my day or my week or all my time differently so that I can properly understand the business? Have you got some really practical tips for them, or just even one practical tip would be wonderful?
Well, I don't know if this is practical. I'll be honest, what I did when I first decided, so I did set that I wanted to do this sort of job. That's the kind of person I am. And when I sat there, I was absolutely nowhere near the skill set, mindset, or any of the things that you needed to get it. But I wrote a list. I wrote a list of all the things I needed to do to get it. I'd not particularly got any qualifications. I decided I needed some of them. It's debatable whether you do, but that was my view at the time. I decided I needed more breadth of knowledge of the business than I had. So I actually went out and got some different jobs. And you can do that on secondments. I did some of those. I did actually some move roles, but I worked my way through my list of things I thought would be helpful to get to this place. Maybe a simpler approach is to go and talk to departments and go, where are the secondment opportunities? Where is there opportunities to do joint work that we could do together that's maybe HR light, as it were? And just get involved in other things around the organisation. You can't take your eye off the ball of doing what you've got to deliver every day, but there's plenty of chances to go above and beyond in lots of spaces. A good opportunity I've seen lots of others do in my team that's worked for them is to take on coaching and mentoring opportunities for people in other bits of the business, because you then get the benefit of reverse mentoring back and you start to really see what's going on in those areas. So I think that's maybe a practical tip that you could take as well.
Oh, yeah, they're fantastic practical tips. And linked in with all of that is this idea that you made a plan, like you decided, this is what I want to do. What are the gaps? How can I fill them? And it sounds like it was quite a long-term plan. How long did it take you from thinking one day, right, this is what I want to do, here's my plan, to getting to the point that you were CPO?
I'm now counting my fingers, which is probably better on a YouTube channel than on a podcast. It was probably 10 years from going, actually, I'd fancy a crack of doing that, to getting the job in itself. So there was quite a few career steps between those 2 points, and I got to senior jobs quickly, and I got to doing things I wanted to do fairly quickly. But yeah, actually getting into a CHRO CPO role was probably a decade after I thought, okay, that's something I fancy doing.
Yeah, so that may be the one time I'm not going to be able to say, oh, how reassuring. So if someone's listening thinking, I really want to do this quickly, but actually it's a great reality check and a reminder that it can be a good idea to think long term. And actually, I bet those years went pretty quickly, and hopefully you enjoyed them as well while you were working your way through developing all those expertise and skills.
I learned a ton of new skills. I met lots of great people who gave me tips and hints that have worked throughout my career, made me more rounded as an individual. I got to travel around bits of the country, and time flew by, because over that period I'd got 2 young kids who are now very, very much grown up and living their best lives, as it were. But yeah, that whole time just did shoot by. Yeah, long term's fine.
And it worked out really well, which I'm very happy to see.
As with all of these things, we could fill an entire podcast with all the stuff I've done wrong, but they were all learning opportunities along the way. And they're probably not the one we want to go for in a positive mindset kind of frame of mind and organization. But, clearly in this sort of conversation, you focus on what's gone well. But yeah, the whole journey was littered with things that could have been done better. And they are all things that you learn from and are incredibly important to the journey.
Yeah, all about that growth mindset. I think I've become slightly obsessed, or my family and clients might say I'm almost obsessed with this concept of growth mindset. And for anyone listening or watching, I keep forgetting to say the watching part. If you're thinking, oh, I find this really hard, like I really take the things that go wrong badly into heart and I find it hard to bounce back from them, I would love to encourage you to go all the way back in the series and listen to the very first episode 1, when I talk about growth mindset and explain what it is. And hopefully you'll find it really helpful. I found it a life-changing concept to learn about, but I'm super conscious of time and our interview, so I'm not going to go off on a massive tangent about it now, Andrew, but it's great to hear you mentioning it. And yeah, there are all these failures. I totally agree. We need to call them learning opportunities rather than failures, because that just feels so negative. Moving on to the next question. What is the one piece of advice you would give to anyone who is about to start their first Chief People Officer role and is feeling nervous about it?
So earlier in my career, when I was on that journey, one of the companies I joined for a period of time to learn new skills was Virgin. And I was part of the team that helped roll their mobile phone business out from a to retail footprint, and we opened 90 odd stores in a period of a year. And one of the phrases, and it's also a title of one of Richard Branson's books, but one of the phrases that permeates that business is "screw it, let's do it." And I think that's my piece of advice to anyone who's about to start their role. If you're getting the role, you have demonstrated the skills, the vision, the capability to do it. So think of the plan that got you into that place, and screw it, go do it, and just put it into practice. Back yourself, listen to your peers along the way, but fundamentally have belief in your own ability to deliver what has got you into that position. That would be my biggest piece of advice to anybody listening.
And so was it screw it, let's do it, or screw it, just do it? Let me make sure I've got this right.
Screw it, let's do it is the phrase. As I say, it's one of Richard's books as well, but it's absolutely the attitude that business is built on, and one that I think is really good advice.
That's making me want to read his book. I have read some of his books. How many books has he written, actually? I've read at least one, but it was a long time ago, so I'm going to have to look that one up.
He's written many, I think. He's doing quite well. He's doing quite well at this business, Lark.
Yeah, that mantra seems to have worked quite well for him, doesn't
Exactly.
it? So that means that, incredibly, we are at the very final question. The very last question is, are there any courses or qualifications you've taken that were particularly useful for succeeding as a CPO?
It's a really interesting one to answer, because I left school with a D and an E at A level. And then over time, and as I focused on learning, ended up to a point where I accidentally did a doctorate, which is an entire story in itself, I think. But along the way, it's really difficult to know which particular courses and qualifications really helped. And there's the silly things, and I talk about breadth. When I was back at school, I did a sewing machine driving license, which sounds like the most pointless thing in the world. And then when I ended up in a business that had manufacturing factories, it was quite useful to be able to demonstrate you could sew a cushion. When I did practical training courses on how to link learning styles and how to develop knowledge transfer in a way that it comes across, gets your message over, rather than just filling time, was important. But I'm probably going to settle on the CIPD courses. And there's lots of debate of where CIPD are in the profession. I'm a huge advocate for what they do. Again, do they get everything right? Not always, but I think in the main, they've driven the profession forward. And I think if you go through their courses, you get a good blend of academic and pragmatic underpinning as to what's gone on and why things happen in this profession. And you can then use that knowledge to really ground the decisions you're making in the evidence-based view that others have done. So I think for me, CIPD qualifications, I did the old professional development scheme that's long since been replaced by more modern approaches. But I do think that is the ones I would recommend. And I do advocate that to the point that pretty much my entire UK HR team has some form of CIPD qualification. And I think that helps give us a consistency and a robustness that is pretty important.
Well, I was really excited to have David de Souza as the very first guest for this series, his Director of Profession at the CIPD. So I'm going to have to let him know that you've given them a big shout out and recommendation at the end. I'm sure he'll be absolutely delighted. To echo what you've said, Andrew, although I guess I'm not talking about this particularly in the context of becoming a CPO, I did the level 7 qualification as part of a master's in HR. And at the time, I used to say it's one of the hardest things I'd ever done, where I was trying to do it with also balancing work, and I had tiny little children at the time. But it was also one of the best things that I ever did for my career, because people do care on your CV if you've got a CIPD qualification in the UK, certainly. But also, I learned so much on that course, and it wasn't just from a HR and people practices perspective, but where you're talking there about evidence-based work. For when this series of interviews with all the CPOs finishes, I'm then going to go on to do some solo episodes where I'll be able to share themes and insights that came through within the interviews. And one of the ways I'm going to do that is by using a framework that I learned as part of being on that program, where you extract answers to everything and then can put them side by side and see what the themes are and look at them properly. And although it might sound like quite a logical process, I feel I haven't started it yet, so I might change my mind about it. But I feel reassured that I can do it, because I had to do it before when I was doing the Masters in HR. And it was a really helpful way of being able to see what assumptions am I making versus what is actual facts, what have people actually said in the interview. So it's funny, I was literally just thinking about that this morning. So it's great to hear you mentioning how helpful the qualifications can be, and the not just qualifications, they do lots of courses that aren't necessarily qualifications.
Yeah, and I think that's a brilliant example of what I'm saying, that you can just take those bits that then become really useful. And in my career, I've been a huge advocate for qualifications. I was really privileged last week to be with our global CEO when we were handing out 32 awards to people who've graduated from courses that we funded with our apprentice levy, many of which are graduate level qualifications in really modern areas. We were handing out a number of level 7 qualifications in AI. And so, I think we should take our own medicine, as it were, and we should be getting those qualifications on board as well. And yeah, if you do mention it to David, I will make sure he buys me a coffee at the next CIPD conference.
That definitely sounds like a good idea. Now, talking about qualifications, you mentioned earlier that you accidentally got a doctorate. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that?
The short version, yeah, I was tasked in a business with improving customer service. And the one directive I was given by the stakeholders was that it had to be measured by Net Promoter Score, which is a very common methodology. And of course, in HR, we generally use ENPS to measure employee engagement. But I was fascinated by the link of the Net Promoter Score to actual business outcomes. So there's lots of talk of one is good for the other, but I was much more interested in, if I move my NPS by 1 point, how much is that worth in pounds and pence? And frankly, nobody could answer the question. And I talked to the academics who've been involved in rolling it out. I talked to the companies that sold NPS surveys, and pretty much nobody could give me a tangible answer, or certainly not a tangible answer that worked for the business I was in. So I thought, I'll just go and work this out then. So in conjunction with some very clever people who understood econometrics and various other things, then was able to get to a point of an answer. And we actually published a paper that was best marketing paper at the British Academy of Management, I think in 2017, something like that. But off the back of that, it was pointed out that the research part I'd contributed was most of a doctorate. So why don't I go and finish it off? So there you go. Accidentally did. And
I see you really did accidentally do it then.
I really accidentally did, and qualified in 2020, and got to wear the silly hat. And I'm very proud and thankful to the team at the University of Staffordshire for supporting me through my career and supporting me through that work.
Oh, fantastic. And I'll have to see if I can find then. Did you say it was a journal article or a publication?
It was publication. It's on my LinkedIn profile if you need a cure for insomnia.
Well, if you've developed some mega fans from watching this episode, which I'm sure you will have done, then they all may want to go. And I'm definitely going to want to go and see and read that. So I'll find it, and I'll see if I can put a link to it in the show notes as well for anyone listening or watching. Well, sadly, that means that our time today has come to an end. So all it leaves me to say is just a huge heartfelt thank you, Andrew, for your time. It has been amazing getting to talk to you. I know that everyone who listens and watches this will be so grateful as well.
It's been fantastic to chat. I love the topic, and to anyone who's moving forward with a career in this sector, good luck with it. It's brilliant fun and you will enjoy it. And more importantly than that, it's incredibly important for business and society that we have good people leaders. Good luck with it.
That brings us to the end of today's episode. I hope you enjoyed meeting Andy as much as I did. There was so much to take away from his story, from creating his very first CPO role from scratch to his practical advice about focusing on well-being, lifelong learning, and having the courage to put your plans into action. I would love to know what stood out most for you from the interview. You can let me know in the YouTube comments, send me a message on LinkedIn, Or if you're feeling incredibly generous, you could even write a post about the podcast on LinkedIn and tag me in so I can see it. It always makes my day to see those posts pop up or to hear what's resonated with you or what you've been enjoying hearing about. If today's conversation has left you feeling inspired and you'd like to explore some more HR Coffee Time episodes, there are 3 that I've picked out for you that I think you might enjoy and find useful to listen to next. These episodes look at coping with setbacks, having a growth mindset, and very importantly, looking after yourself as an HR professional, because these are all things that Andy mentioned during the interview. There are lots of other episodes I could recommend as well, but I don't want to completely overwhelm you. So episode 1 is how to feel more confident at work. Episode 43 is the one thing that will boost your resilience throughout your HR career with guest Tom Cleary. And finally, episode 123, Avoid Burnout, How to Spot Signs of Stress and Take Action with Dr. Joe Burrell. I'll pop all the links to those episodes in the show notes and in the YouTube description for you, so they're nice and easy to find. And then finally, before I say goodbye, can I just ask you for a small favour? If you've been enjoying HR Coffee Time, I would be so grateful if you could rate and review the show in Apple Podcasts or just rate it on Spotify. You can't do reviews on Spotify at the moment. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, can you just give it a like and subscribe to the show? Because all of those things make such a difference in helping other people to discover the podcast and give it a try. And I would just love to help as many HR professionals as I can with this free show. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to being back again in 2 weeks with another Chief People Officer interview for you.